What happens when a family changes the locks on the very house their father built with his own hands? Eugene wasn't ready to give up his legacy or his independence. What he did next left everyone stunned. Eugene Miller was a man of quiet strength and slow, steady pride, the kind that comes from a lifetime of building with his own hands. He'd laid every brick of his house himself nearly 40 years ago, alongside his late wife and, later, his children. Each beam in the ceiling, each tile in the kitchen, held the memory of laughter, sweat, and Sunday suppers that had stretched long into the night. Now, at 73, Eugene lived alone. The children were grown, scattered by jobs and obligations, and the house had become quieter than he liked. Still, it was his. The creak in the third stair was his, the coolness of the north bedroom in spring, the gentle way the maple tree outside tapped against the bedroom window in the evening, all of it his, a living memory of a family he'd built from scratch. On the day everything changed, Eugene had only gone out for groceries. He'd greeted old friends at the market, browsed for his favorite rye bread, and lingered over the selection of apples, choosing the tart ones he liked for baking. The sun was bright, and he felt almost light-hearted as he loaded the bags into his battered pickup truck and set off for home. When he turned down Maple Lane, the familiar sight of his house, white-clapboard, blue shutters, the porch swing still moving slightly in the breeze, filled him with the comfort of routine. But as he stepped onto the porch, something was wrong. He set down his bags and reached for his keys, only to find that the lock wouldn't turn. He tried again, then noticed the shiny new hardware glinting in the sunlight. Eugene frowned, confusion quickly melting into a prickling suspicion. He knocked, not too hard. Perhaps one of the kids had stopped by, perhaps there was a mistake. No answer. He circled around the house, checked the back door, the garage. Every entry was locked tight with new locks. His name, carefully stenciled on the mailbox, was now crossed out, replaced with a plastic nameplate, Harrison Family. He set his groceries on the porch and pulled out his phone, his hands trembling. He called his eldest daughter, Linda. She picked up after a few rings, her voice bright but tense. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Linda, did you change the locks?" "I can't get in." There was a pause, long enough that Eugene's stomach twisted. "Dad, I was going to call you. We thought it was time to help you transition. It's just not safe for you to be living there alone anymore." Eugene's voice grew tight. "Transition? I built that house, Linda. It's mine." "I know, Dad, but you forget things. Remember the stove last month? And you've been slipping. We're just trying to help." Eugene felt the familiar sting of being managed, of being pushed to the margins. "You could have talked to me." "We did, Dad. You wouldn't listen. We had to make a decision." The line went dead as Linda hurried off, leaving Eugene staring at his own front door, a stranger in his own home. The neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Donnelly, walking her dog, gave him a sympathetic look. "Everything all right, Gene?" He forced a smile, not trusting himself to speak. He retrieved his groceries and, with nowhere else to go, sat on the porch swing, the house looming silently behind him. As the day wore on, family began to arrive, first Linda, then his son Mark and daughter-in-law Jessica. They brought papers, doctor's notes, power of attorney forms, a moving checklist. Eugene listened in stunned silence as they explained the plan, a senior apartment, closer to Linda, where everything would be taken care of. Jessica, her voice gentle but firm, insisted it was best for everyone. Eugene bristled. "You all think I can't take care of myself. But this house is mine. I know every inch of it, every nail. You can't just lock me out." Linda's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't back down. "We're trying to protect you, Dad. Please, just come see the new place." That night, Eugene slept in his truck, wrapped in his old army blanket, parked beneath the maple tree he'd planted as a sapling. The house, his house, stood silent behind him, the windows dark, the locks cold and unyielding. As dawn broke, Eugene stood in the yard, watching the first light creep over the roof. He remembered the blueprints tucked in the attic, the hidden latches he'd built into the cellar doors, the spare key he'd set in a place no one but he would ever think to look. For the first time in days, a spark of his old confidence returned. They had changed the locks. But they'd forgotten who had built the house, and everything inside it. Eugene awoke stiff and aching in the driver's seat of his truck, the pale morning sun filtering through the windshield. The dew was thick on the grass, and for a moment he felt like a young man camping in the yard, before the ache in his back reminded him of the years that had passed. The house was quiet. No one was home. His children, he assumed, had left after their intervention, content in their decision and confident he would eventually accept reality. But Eugene wasn't ready to surrender his independence, nor the house that carried the very shape of his hands in every board. He started by checking the garden. The roses needed watering, and the tomato cages he'd built from spare wire needed shoring up. Working with the plants steadied his mind, anchoring him to memories of his wife, May, kneeling by his side, her laughter drifting in the summer air. He paused by the back gate, eyeing the old tool shed. Inside, under a shelf, was an ancient metal box, rusted, but still locked. Eugene fished out the key from his keyring, opened the box, and pulled out a battered folder, the original blueprints of the house. Spread across the hood of his truck, the blueprints unfurled like a map of memory and intention. He traced the outline of the crawlspace under the back porch, the hidden panel in the pantry, a childish prank from when Linda was 8, the narrow passage behind the laundry chute that no one else had ever bothered to use. Every secret nook and clever fix came flooding back. He smiled to himself. His children might have changed the locks, but they hadn't changed the bones of the house. He packed up the blueprints and went to see his oldest friend, Walt, who lived 3 houses down. Walt greeted him with a raised eyebrow and a strong cup of black coffee. They sat in the cluttered kitchen, sunlight dappling the table, and Eugene unburdened himself. He told Walt everything: the locks, the confrontation, the night in the truck. Walt shook his head, sympathy in his weathered eyes. "They mean well, Gene, but you're not done yet. You need to remind them whose house it is." "Not sure how," Eugene admitted. "They have power of attorney, doctor's notes, the works. But they don't know this place like I do." Walt grinned. "Then you start where you always did, with your hands and your head." They hatched a plan. Walt would distract Linda when she came by later that afternoon, inviting her over for coffee and a neighborly chat. That would give Eugene time to slip into the backyard, where he'd built a narrow access door behind the azalea bushes decades earlier. Most wouldn't see it, but Eugene's memory was sharp as ever when it came to his handiwork. At precisely 2 in the afternoon, Walt set the plan in motion. Eugene waited until he saw Linda cross the street, chatting amiably with Walt on the sidewalk. He moved quickly, slipping behind the bushes. The hidden latch was just as he'd left it, worn smooth but perfectly functional. With a push and a grunt, the door swung open, revealing the dark, cobwebbed crawlspace beneath the porch. He ducked inside, moving with slow, careful confidence. Inside the crawlspace, Eugene found himself moving by touch and memory. He crawled to the far wall and reached up, feeling for the loose plank he'd never told anyone about. His hand closed over the familiar notch. He pushed, and a narrow shaft of light appeared. He was beneath the pantry. He pushed upward. The floor panel slid aside with barely a sound. Eugene was in his own house again. He stood in the pantry, heart pounding, not just from the effort, but from the exhilaration of being home on his own terms. He listened for voices. None. The house was empty. He moved through the rooms, touching familiar things, restoring order, taking in the scent of old wood and lemon polish. He found the legal papers his children had left, stacked neatly on the dining room table. He didn't touch them. Instead, he went to his old desk and pulled out his will and the deed, reading over every word to reassure himself that nothing had truly been taken from him, at least, not yet. He lingered in the living room, where the afternoon sun filtered through the curtains in golden slants. He sat in his old armchair and allowed himself a few minutes of quiet, the memories of family filling the air. As he left the way he'd come, closing the crawlspace door behind him, Eugene felt a spark of victory. He wasn't beaten. His house was still his. He knew it wouldn't be the last confrontation, but he was ready. His children had underestimated the man who had built every inch of this place, and the next time, Eugene planned to remind them, not just with words, but with everything he knew. The following days found Eugene in a strange limbo. He returned each morning to tend the garden, sitting quietly on the porch swing with a mug of coffee while his home stood locked behind him. Neighbors passed by, offering sympathetic glances and, occasionally, questions about what had happened. Eugene remained tight-lipped, neither wanting to burden them nor to stoke gossip, but inside he seethed with a mixture of humiliation and stubborn resolve. Linda and Mark returned in tandem on Thursday, pulling up in matching SUVs. Eugene watched from the sidewalk as they entered the house without so much as a knock, laughing together over something on Linda's phone. He waited a few moments, then approached the porch, hands in his pockets. Linda was the first to see him. Her face went blank, then tense. "Dad, you shouldn't just show up like this." Eugene fixed her with a look that had once made his children sit up straighter at the dinner table. "Show up? Linda, this is my home. Or was, last I checked." Mark tried to intercede, placing a hand on Eugene's shoulder. "Come on, Dad. Don't make this any harder." Eugene shrugged off the hand. "Harder? You changed my locks and put someone else's name on my mailbox. How much harder do you think it is for me?" Linda's tone softened a fraction. "We're just trying to keep you safe. You've been forgetful. Last month you left the hose running all night, and there was that gas bill mix-up." Eugene bristled. "You think a forgotten hose means I'm ready for the scrap heap?" The argument simmered, neither side budging. Linda produced more paperwork, suggesting he sign a residency agreement at the senior apartments. "It's got a nice view of the lake," she said, her voice falsely cheerful. "And group activities." Eugene barely glanced at the forms. "I built this place. With these hands. The only view I want is from my own front porch." Their conversation was interrupted by Jessica, Mark's wife, who emerged from the kitchen holding a set of keys. "Maybe we can compromise, Gene. You can come visit whenever you want, but the kids need to feel secure. What if you promised not to come alone? Just call ahead." Eugene stared at her, amazed at how easily they recast his life into something that needed managing. He felt his pulse race, but he drew a deep breath and stood tall. "I won't be managed in my own house. I know every inch of this place. I know things about it you never will. You want to lock me out, fine. But don't expect me to fade away." Jessica shifted, her face coloring. Mark and Linda exchanged uneasy glances. Sensing he would get nowhere, Eugene turned and strode down the sidewalk, not looking back. He didn't want them to see the anger, or the sadness, flickering across his face. That evening, Walt stopped by with 2 cold beers and sat beside Eugene on the porch. "You ready to fight back?" he asked. Eugene nodded. "They think a piece of paper changes everything. But this house is more than deeds and locks." Walt grinned. "Then you show them what it means to be a builder, not just an owner." The next morning, Eugene set about gathering proof of his competence: tax records, paid bills, letters from old colleagues and friends vouching for his mental sharpness. He even scheduled an appointment with his doctor, insisting on a cognitive assessment, determined to have hard evidence against the vague forgetfulness his children waved around. He called Robert, the family lawyer, and explained everything. Robert promised to review the power of attorney and deed, and to help Eugene assert his rights. "Just be patient," Robert advised. "Sometimes, standing your ground is the best way to draw the line." By evening, Eugene was exhausted, but he felt a flicker of hope. He retrieved the blueprints and his collection of spare keys, carefully labeling each one. He wrote a long letter to Linda and Mark, outlining his wishes, his history with the house, and the ways he still contributed to the neighborhood and his own care. He placed the letter in an envelope, slid it under the front door, and sat back on the porch swing, where he belonged. The lines were drawn, not just in dust, but in the unbreakable grain of the wood beneath his hands. He had been underestimated before. But Eugene Miller was just getting started. Eugene was up before sunrise the next day, the soft light filtering through his truck window. He rubbed the stiffness from his neck, took a swig of lukewarm coffee from his thermos, and set out on his morning walk around the property. Every step along the edge of the garden, every glance at the house, hardened his resolve. He'd built this place with a vision, solid and true, and he would not let it be reduced to a set of locks and signatures. As the town woke, Eugene headed into Main Street. At the hardware store, he greeted the owner, young Scott Winters, whose own father had worked alongside Eugene decades ago during the house's first renovations. Scott listened as Eugene explained the situation, anger flaring in the young man's eyes. "You taught my dad everything he knows, Mr. Miller. If you need help with anything, you just ask." Eugene bought a new toolbox and some supplies, slipping them into the back of his truck. He stopped at the bakery, picking up a cinnamon roll, and checked in at the clinic for his cognitive assessment. Dr. Simmons, who had treated Eugene for years, ran him through memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and reflex checks. When the exam was done, Dr. Simmons smiled. "You're as sharp as ever, Eugene. I'll have your results sent to your lawyer." The news buoyed Eugene. He felt vindicated as he left the clinic, a renewed bounce in his step. On the way home, he spotted Mrs. Donnelly and her dog, Rusty. She waved him over and offered her own encouragement. "You built that house, Gene. Don't let anyone tell you it's not yours." Back at the property, Eugene retrieved the blueprints and a flashlight from the toolbox. He waited until late afternoon, when the shadows were long, and watched as Mark arrived to check on the place. Mark fumbled with the new keys, looking over his shoulder as if expecting Eugene to leap from the bushes. Instead, Eugene waited patiently until Mark left, then circled around the back and slipped through the hidden crawlspace entrance. He quietly closed the panel behind him and emerged in the pantry, breathing in the familiar smell of the house. Old wood, cinnamon, a hint of his late wife's lavender polish. He checked every room, noting that Linda and Mark had moved some furniture, emptied a few drawers, even started packing away his personal photos. On the dining room table, a new stack of paperwork waited. More forms for senior living, glossy brochures touting social events and lakefront views. Eugene's stomach turned. He left everything untouched, focusing instead on what mattered. He went to his workshop in the basement and inventoried his tools, relieved to find them all there. With practiced hands, he fixed a loose banister, tightened the screws on the back porch, and swept sawdust from the corners. Before slipping out again, Eugene left a note on the kitchen counter in his tidy, precise handwriting. "I built this house for my family, not for strangers. I am still here, and I will not be erased." He signed his name boldly at the bottom. As dusk settled, Eugene joined Walt on the porch with a fresh cinnamon roll and a pair of cold sodas. Walt clapped him on the back. "You keep fighting, Gene. This is your home. They'll see that, one way or another." That night, Eugene slept in the truck again, the house looming dark and silent behind him. But his spirit had never burned brighter. With every repair, every quiet reclamation, he reclaimed not just his property, but his place in the story of his family, and of the home he'd built from the ground up. The battle wasn't over. But Eugene Miller was a builder. And he was just getting started. Word of Eugene's struggle quietly spread through the neighborhood. Some disapproved, whispering about old men who can't let go, but most remembered the countless times Eugene had helped repair a fence, shovel snow, or fix a bulky furnace for a neighbor. The local pastor stopped by the porch with a thermos of coffee and prayers. Mrs. Donnelly left a casserole on the truck's hood with a note, "Hold fast." Even Scott from the hardware store began dropping by, asking if Eugene needed anything or just wanted to chat. But support wasn't the only thing growing. Linda and Mark became increasingly anxious as their plan met resistance at every turn. The locks had been changed, but they couldn't keep Eugene from the property. Their calls to the senior apartment office grew more urgent. They started talking about legal measures, and Linda asked Dr. Simmons to reconsider her cognitive assessment. Dr. Simmons refused. "Eugene is sharp and fully capable. I won't sign off on anything else," she told Linda sternly. Meanwhile, Eugene worked with Robert, his lawyer, to assert his rights. Robert reviewed every document, carefully explaining each power of attorney clause and loophole. "You're still on the deed, Eugene. They can't remove you without due process, and they'd have to prove you're incapacitated. They don't have that." Armed with this knowledge, Eugene took action. He wrote a formal letter to Linda, Mark, and Jessica, reminding them of the law, his rights, and the fact that he had evidence of their overreach. He included a copy of Dr. Simmons' letter and a notarized statement from Walt and Mrs. Donnelly, vouching for his mental fitness and independence. Then, Eugene started making himself visible, attending church, the local Rotary meeting, and even the neighborhood association's monthly potluck. He talked openly about his story, not to gain sympathy but to remind everyone that he was still very much part of the community. The next weekend, Eugene staged his boldest move yet. While Mark and Jessica were out shopping for senior supplies, Eugene enlisted Scott's help. Together, they restored the old Miller mailbox, removing the Harrison family plaque and polishing up his original hand-painted nameplate. They mowed the lawn, trimmed the hedges, and swept the walkway, making the house look every bit as lively and lived in as ever. When Linda pulled up that evening, she was startled to see the porch light on, Eugene's old pickup in the drive, and a gathering of neighbors chatting by the steps. Mark sputtered with disbelief. "He's trespassing." Walt, standing beside Eugene, answered coolly, "He's not trespassing. He's home." Linda tried reasoning. She tried threats. But for every argument, Eugene calmly produced a document, a neighbor's testimony, or a legal reference. The facade of control that Linda and Mark had constructed began to crumble. The next day, the town newspaper ran a small article, "Beloved local builder fights to reclaim his home." The community response was overwhelming. Letters poured in to Linda, Mark, and even the senior living facility, urging compassion and common sense. By Sunday, Linda appeared on the porch, exhausted and near tears. "Dad, can we please talk?" she asked quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just got scared. I thought you needed us to protect you." Eugene looked at his daughter, his heart heavy with love and pride. "You forgot, Linda. I built this house so no one would ever have to feel alone. Not you, not me. Let's fix this, together." They sat, just the two of them, on the porch as dusk fell, talking long into the night. There were no quick fixes, but for the first time in weeks, Eugene felt hope, real, solid, builder's hope, beginning to take root. The house stood behind them, lights glowing in the windows, as if it, too, had found its voice again. For the first time in weeks, Eugene and Linda shared breakfast at the kitchen table. The eggs were overcooked, the toast a little burnt, but neither cared. Just being inside the house together, without tension, felt like a victory. Eugene poured coffee, watching the steam curl in the morning light. Linda sat across from him, silent and fidgeting, her eyes occasionally darting to the stack of papers on the counter. Finally, Linda spoke. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. I see how much this house means to you. I worry. Mark and we've been talking, and maybe we went too far. But we can't help but notice you're getting older." Eugene sipped his coffee, considering his response. "I am getting older, Linda. But I haven't lost my mind. I haven't lost my sense of home. You forgot that I built this place, not just the walls, but the feeling. I don't expect you to understand everything, but I do expect you to respect it." Linda's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I'm sorry, Dad. I got scared of something happening to you, of not being able to help, of losing you." Eugene reached across the table, his work-worn hand covering hers. "You'll lose me one day, Linda. We all lose people. But if you keep trying to protect me by locking me out of my own life, we'll lose each other before that happens." Tears ran down Linda's face as she squeezed his hand. "I promise, I want to fix this. But Mark is stubborn, and Jessica, she's embarrassed by how the neighbors talk." Eugene nodded. "Let me handle Mark. I'll talk to him man to man." Later that day, Eugene called Mark and invited him over, just the two of them. Mark arrived, looking wary. Eugene greeted him with a cold drink on the back porch. There was no pretense. The conversation was frank. "Mark, I know you and Linda meant well, but you went about it all wrong. I built this house. I know its strengths and its weaknesses. I'm not ready to hand it over, not until I have to." Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We just wanted to make sure you were safe, Gene. I've seen too many old men fall through the cracks. I didn't want that for you. I appreciate the worry, son. But worry can't become control. You want to help? Help me stay here. Help me keep this place running, and keep it in the family, the right way." Mark finally looked Eugene in the eyes. "All right. I'll talk to Linda. We'll figure something out. No more surprises." That night, Eugene called Robert the lawyer and explained the change in tone. Robert suggested a family meeting, with him present as a neutral third party, to discuss everyone's wishes and clarify the legal boundaries. Eugene agreed, hopeful but guarded. He spent the next day preparing, organizing documents, making a list of tasks he still managed easily around the house, even jotting down the repairs he'd finished that week. The meeting took place in the living room, the whole family gathered, tension humming just below the surface. Robert led the discussion, making it clear that Eugene's competence and rights remained intact, and that any major decisions would be made together, with respect and transparency. There were tears and apologies, but there was also laughter as Eugene told stories about building the house, of Linda falling into the half-finished pond, of Mark hammering his thumb more times than he could count, of May painting the shutters bright blue. The house, filled with voices and memory, seemed to breathe easier. By nightfall, an agreement was reached. Eugene would remain in the house as long as he wished. Linda and Mark would help with chores and errands, and everyone would communicate honestly. The locks would stay, but Eugene would have every key. The house would stay Miller, through and through. Eugene stood at the front window, watching the family depart, feeling both exhausted and deeply at peace. The silence of the empty house was no longer lonely, it was full of love reclaimed. The weeks that followed brought a gentle transformation, not only in Eugene's house, but in his family. Linda and Mark started visiting more often, not with the clipboard or stern lectures, but with groceries, baked bread, or even just a thermos of coffee and a listening ear. Jessica, who had been so concerned about what the neighbors think, soon joined in for garden projects, sometimes bringing their youngest to run through the backyard or help pick tomatoes. Eugene took it upon himself to teach Mark and his grandchildren the little secrets of the house. On a sunny Saturday, he showed Mark how to fix a leaky gutter using the spare copper wire he'd kept in the tool shed since 1992. He walked his granddaughter, Lily, through the steps of tuning up the old lawnmower, passing on skills and stories that might otherwise have faded. He even opened the blueprints for Linda, unrolling them on the kitchen table. For the first time, she looked not just at the plans but at her father's handwriting, little notes in the margins, sketches of possible additions, reminders to ask May about paint color. Linda traced the lines with her finger, realizing how much care and foresight her father had built into every detail. With the help of the whole family, Eugene cleaned out the attic, sorting through decades of memories. Boxes of his children's report cards, May's wedding dress, old letters, and family photos in sepia and Polaroid. Laughter and tears mingled as stories flowed, tales of backyard campouts, thunderstorms watched from the porch, and May's famous peach cobbler. But not every moment was easy. There were tense silences, especially when Mark or Linda slipped into old habits of giving orders rather than asking questions. Each time, Eugene would quietly remind them, "I'm still here, still the builder." They learned to pause, to listen, to trust his instincts, and to help in ways that honored his independence, not threatened it. Meanwhile, the community's support never wavered. Neighbors dropped by with garden cuttings, baked goods, and offers to help with repairs. Walt and Eugene resumed their tradition of Sunday morning chess on the porch. Even the local paper did a follow-up story, Builder's Legacy, Family Finds New Strength in Old Walls. Eugene made a point of reconnecting with old friends and the church choir, and he invited Linda and Mark to join him at the Rotary picnic. It became clear that this was not just about a house, but about reclaiming family, not by force, but by love, patience, and shared work. The locks on the doors stayed, but now there were keys for everyone. Eugene placed a spare set in a small tin and gave them to Lily, saying, "Just in case. Every house needs a secret keeper." One evening, as twilight gathered and fireflies blinked in the backyard, Eugene sat on the porch swing with Linda. They watched the lights in the house come on, room by room, as Mark and the kids moved about inside. Linda broke the quiet. "I was afraid we'd lose you to this house. I never realized the house was the way we could find you again." Eugene smiled, eyes glistening with pride and relief. "I built this house so we'd always have a place to come home to. Looks like it worked." As the summer breeze rustled the maple leaves and laughter drifted out through the open windows, Eugene felt the peace that comes from a job well done, a foundation rebuilt not with nails, but with forgiveness and love. He was home. And this time, so was his family. Autumn crept in, gold and scarlet leaves tumbling down to swirl around the porch steps Eugene had once built with his own hands. The air was brisk, but the house on Maple Lane radiated a new warmth, a sense of belonging and continuity that even the longest shadows could not erase. Eugene rose early every morning, savoring the quiet before the day's bustle. He started a new project, repairing the old garden fence, this time with Mark and Lily helping, each of them learning not only carpentry but also the stories woven into every board. With every hammer tap and measured cut, Eugene felt himself passing on something deeper than skill, a living legacy, a lesson in resilience, forgiveness, and the value of roots. One Saturday, the family hosted a neighborhood cookout. Eugene, apron dusted with flour, grilled hot dogs while Linda and Jessica set out homemade pies. Neighbors filled the yard, laughter spilling out across the lawn as kids played tag beneath the old maple. Walt led a toast to Eugene, and Scott from the hardware store presented him with a handmade sign, "Miller's House, built to last." That night, as the family sat on the porch swing, watching the stars appear, Eugene felt the fullness of his life. He saw the flicker of gratitude in Linda's eyes, the peace in Mark's steady presence, the curiosity in his grandchildren as they listened to tales of the house's construction. He knew that time would keep moving, that one day he would have to let go of his beloved house. But he no longer feared it. His family understood now, not just what he'd built, but why he'd built it. They promised to carry forward the stories, the traditions, and the spirit that made this house more than wood and nails. In the weeks that followed, Eugene wrote letters to each of his children and grandchildren. He tucked the blueprints and a set of house keys into a weathered cedar box, leaving it in the attic with a note, "For those who remember how it began, and who will keep it alive." On his last evening before the first winter frost, Eugene sat quietly on the porch, feeling the pulse of life within the walls he had raised. He was not afraid of the future, not when he had taught his family how to build, how to forgive, and how to come home. As the stars blinked above and the wind swept gently through the trees, Eugene closed his eyes, content. The house, his house, stood strong, not just because of what he had done, but because of the love he had restored within it. And so, on Maple Lane, where once a man built a home from the ground up, a family finally discovered what it truly meant to belong.